presenting with the team from the UK. We have journalists and technologists from the BBC and the Times who joined together to create a Python library for data journalists to analyze who pays members of the UK Parliament. To take us through this, through their work, we have with us Clare Spencer from the BBC and Juan Ginzo from the Times.
Hi there. Our team is MP Interest Tracker. Can you see our screen?
Yes, we can.
Great. We aimed to help journalists scrutinise politicians. I'm Clare Spencer, and along with Mariam from the BBC, we joined forces with Juan and George from the Times of London. So what is it, who's it for, and what does it make? MP Interest Tracker is an experiment which showed that data scientists could indeed use GenAI with a set of Python functions to find ideas for stories to investigate about the finances of members of Parliament in the UK. For example, this is one of many examples of the kind of output our data scientists obtained after running the code they'd written. These are companies that pay MPs most often. The larger the size of the font, the more often politicians have declared that company has paid them. So as a journalist, I'd say if I had this information, okay, the companies that stand out here are Ipsos Mori, YouGov and Savanta Comres. What do? They're all market research companies. So I'd ask myself, could it be that these companies are paying members of Parliament to fill out surveys often? And before delving any deeper, I'd check if anyone had already published a similar story. Alas, this time the answer was yes. So we didn't have an exclusive on this example, but this did indicate that our code was surfacing newsworthy data. And this takes us smoothly onto the context we are in currently. This article shows journalists occasionally write about money MPs receive outside their day jobs. Oh, and here's another example. And in the first line of this example, we can see the source of that information. It says Parliament has published its Register of Financial Interests. That register is the same data set we're using. MPs are obliged in the UK to declare on the register any financial interests that could influence their words, actions, or indeed their votes. And it's published online to the public. But there's a problem. The author of that last article told us it's quite difficult to use that register. Searching through it is too time-consuming for many. I'll give you an idea of what it's like for a journalist. So you go to the UK Parliament website, you have to choose the year, and then you have to choose a 2-week period, and then you have to choose a format, HTML or PDF, and only then you have to choose an MP, so their surname, then their first name. I'll go with Boris Johnson. And only then do you get to the point where you see some declarations of financial interest. So there's up to 9 categories. There are second jobs, and then this is Boris Johnson's gifts, and gifts. It goes on quite long, his gifts. And then there's another section which is gifts from people specifically outside the UK, which we can just have a closer look at. So you get the idea that this would be difficult to look through, difficult to compare, find trends, find outliers as a journalist manually looking through the register. But there are a few other characteristics of the data that are also problematic. The MPs are free to write the names of the companies whichever way they like. They're free to submit their declarations with the units of payment in whichever unit of payment they want to use. So this inconsistency makes it challenging to automate any analysis. So this led us to ask, how might we make it easier to find newsworthy data from the register? And given the particular challenges of that data, our data scientists had an idea to test out. Would it be possible to use generative AI to structure that data in the register? I'll pass over to Juan to explain further.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. So I think the too long didn't read is that we did find a way to structure the data. by using generative AI. We made it easy for ourselves to download the register at any particular point in time, to clean the raw data so it's ready for some text analytics. And also, I think, and this is the most novel part of our work, is that we use Gen AI to extract structured data without the need to train a specific model on the specific data set. So like we can see in the next slide, make it quite straightforward to download a whole 2-week register that allows us to not have to hit the register every time we want to run analysis, and we can then save this data for downstream processing. That downstream processing in the next slide, we also made it easy to then split and do some initial cleaning of the data. So far, nothing extremely novel, but extremely helpful for people that have to use these data set as a resource of information for their stories. And then in the next slide, we get to the meat of the project, which was to try to use Gen AI not as a copywriting tool, but as a data extraction tool. And our hypothesis was that instead of trying to train a model, which can be quite costly in terms of data labeling, to try to use the best in kind large language models that are kind of general purpose, to actually do that data extraction in a way that we can easily iterate on the type of entities that we're asking the LLM to extract for us. So we can both get some kind of templated answers out of it, but also allow journalists to come up with their own hypothesis on what data they like to extract from those from the register. So I think we can achieve that with some caveats that I'll mention in a bit. If we go to the next slide, ultimately this provides the ability for journalists to do some analytics on the data in a straightforward way, to tag MPs to different companies, and also, again, with some caveats, but to look at monetary amounts, to find those either high ticket items that might be of interest, or to get an overall sense of what the distributions of amounts are, both by MPs or by companies or industries. In the next slide. So going back to the original question that Claire posed, can we use generative AI to create a structured version of the register? I think we definitely can, but with some caveats that I think are inherent to the type of technology that we use, which are listed in the next slide. Yeah, so basically start with the good. I think it's a really good research tool to surface stories. It's really good at finding the needle in the haystack because it saves a lot of time for journalists. They don't need to go through each different entry, but they can start doing analysis across different MPs or time periods, which is something that would be otherwise quite effort intensive. And it's also easy to prototype and work with. So we are not bound to any specific train model or set of label data. Ultimately, we're using what's technically called like a zero-shot approach by leveraging the underlying powerful LLM model, in our case from OpenAI. So we think that's then also quite easy to prototype and come up with different hypotheses on what to look for in the data set. The limitations is that the recall, in the technical sense, it's not 100%. So you might be having some false positives or false negatives, which means that adding up figures, for example, of monetary amounts, though you can use some techniques or just get the median instead of the averages, it might still be something that needs to be cross-checked with the actual data. And that's something we also work with, the capability to trace back to the specific entry in the register where we are extracting the entity. But in a way, I think that we think the biggest or most powerful thing about this approach is to find those needles in the haystack, to save a lot of time, the easy prototyping, but then all the checks that need to be made are still in place for that needle in the haystack. So those are things that the journalist still needs to do. But I think we're all quite happy with the results. We think it's a type of technology that will be quite useful for newsrooms. Yes, any questions?
Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Claire. I think there is one question that Mariam is going to answer live. The question is, how big of a problem was false positives?
Yeah, false positives. Sorry, are you're going to go with it, Mariam, or should I?
You can go for it.
Yeah, so false positives, not that much. I think it doesn't, from what we've seen, it doesn't hallucinate things that much. I think the false negatives are the biggest issue. So yeah, I think from the two, it's really the rate on which you might be missing information that we found that might be the biggest hurdle instead of false positives. And the traceability makes it easy to kind of go back and check if it's actually correct or not, which also helps more with the false positives than it would with the false negatives.
Thank you, Juan. We have another question. Luke wants to know, is MP Interest Tracker open for journalists to use right now?
Yeah, so I would say, please reach out to us. And we can kind of work with you on how to share the approach in more depth. Yeah, so feel free to reach out to us.
And just to expand on that question, Marcella is asking if how can it be found somewhere? Do newsrooms need to integrate it?
So at the moment, we're just finishing off kind of development and testing and code reviewing everything. And then we'll reach out to potential collaborators to talk about how they might be able to integrate that once we're done with that process.
Awesome. If you have any other questions, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A box. Sanskriti wants to know if there's a demo, but I think you will be getting to that soon. Is that the answer for that?
Exactly, yeah.
Great. So just as we wait for more questions to come in, could you, I have one question of my own, which was if people from other parts of the world were to use this, what would you think would be the most challenging part of adapting a tool like this?
I'm happy to take that one. I think one thing that we've learned is that having a lot of domain knowledge is really important when you're working with data that relates to the political system in a specific country. And I'm sure a lot of you might know that the political and parliamentary system in the UK has so many quirks and unique characteristics. So I actually think the biggest challenge if somebody wanted to implement something similar in their own part of the world is not necessarily the technical aspect. It's having all of that domain knowledge about how the data is put together, the best ways to interpret it, all of the caveats about doing that responsibly and sensibly. So hopefully this is an interesting proof of concept to show that it is possible to apply LLMs to start getting leads from these data sets, but I think the domain knowledge that people would have is the most challenging thing.
Thank you, Mariam. And I don't know if everybody can see Mariam because I'm not sure if she's been spotlighted, but that's Mariam Ahmed from the BBC, who is also part of a Team MP Interest Tracker answering that question. And a question from Zefania, which I'd like to expand on. How did you go about checking for the efficiency of this particular tool?
Yeah, so it's been relatively manual so far, but we do have a scheme to try to ultimately to really build a proper assessment. You would need to go and see how it performed on the whole register to get the false positives and the false negatives rates, which would be slightly quite time consuming because it will still be a manual process. So I think we can defer that towards the end. But yeah, I think for the use case of finding the needle in the haystack and the quick traceability, kind of the overall performance, doesn't necessarily matter that much in a way. But if you wanted to do analytics in the sense of trying to add up numbers and report on those numbers with confidence, then you would need to assess the performance on that specific implementation for that specific register.
Great. Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Claire. While I have you here, I just want to ask you one more question. This brings us, everybody, to the end of the Fellowship Showcase for this particular festival, but we will be opening up fellowships for the next year as well. So while I have you, Claire and Juan, maybe a question that is completely putting you on the spot, but in preparing your particular application for the fellowship, you had to submit a proposal that you jointly worked on. Is there any tips that you can share with prospective applicants on how they should go about preparing, or how you went about preparing your own particular proposal?
I think I can answer that, and I don't know if Claire, Marian, you have another opinion as well, but I found very useful to kind of be productive and to find a team that matched, that we had a clear sense of not only what we wanted to do from the subject matter point of view, but also from the technical point of view. So I think working closely with your technical partner to understand if it's something that you can do in a relatively straightforward way, where the risks might end up being on the performance side of things, but not on the feasibility side of things. That's a low risk approach, but I think that at least really help for kind of peace of mind, and to make something that we can talk about with confidence. Yeah, I don't know, Claire, Marian, do you have any other?
Just from a practical point of view, I think that, it was originally Mariam's idea, not the the idea that we proposed. And then what happens is, so you have to join forces with somebody from your own organisation, one technical, one editorial. And I actually found out about Mariam's idea from a BBC News Lab's hack, which is a similar kind of collaboration, looking at a problem and seeing if we can solve it. It was a hack about news avoidance, and if we could apply generative AI to that. We didn't actually use her idea in that hack, but she came up with an idea which I wanted, which I loved, and I asked her, do you want to go forward with the fellowship, try and apply for this fellowship? And then we were just really lucky that the Times had a very similar idea. One, because we didn't need to change our ideas too much, because then in the process you have to join, once you've joined with an editorial and technical person from your corporation or your organisation, you have to then join with at least one other team from another news organisation. So we were lucky that they had a similar idea. We didn't need to scrap ideas, we could merge ideas. And then we were lucky they were in the same time zone, which was a very practical reason why it worked. And then we merged the ideas using Google Docs. So that's the practical advice about applying for the fellowship.
Awesome. Thank you both. I'll let you go now. Thank you for answering that on the fly. Really appreciate it. And thank you all fellows for your incredible presentations today. It's been a lot of hard work over the last 6 months, and it's definitely not been easy for many teams, as collaboration is definitely something that requires a lot of patience, but you all pulled through, and the results have been great. So thank you all.